HMAS Sydney, named after the Australian city of Sydney, was one of 3 modified Leander-class light cruisers operated by the Royal Australian Navy. Ordered for the Royal Navy as HMS Phaeton, the cruiser was purchased by the Australian government and renamed prior to her 1934 launch. During the early part of her operational history, Sydney helped enforce sanctions during the Abyssinian crisis, and at the start of World War II was assigned to convoy escort and patrol duties in Australian waters. In May 1940, Sydney joined the British Mediterranean Fleet for an 8-month deployment, during which she sank 2 Italian warships, participated in multiple shore bombardments, and provided support to the Malta convoys, while receiving minimal damage and no casualties. On her return to Australia in February 1941, Sydney resumed convoy escort and patrol duties in home waters. On 19 November 1941, Sydney was involved in a mutually destructive engagement with the German auxiliary cruiser Cormoran, and was lost with all 645 aboard. The wrecks of both ships were lost until 2008. Sydney was found on 17 March, 5 days after her adversary. Sydney's defeat is commonly attributed to the proximity of the 2 ships during the engagement, and Cormoran's advantages of surprise and rapid, accurate fire. However, the cruise's loss with all hands compared to the survival of most of the Germans have resulted in controversy, with some alleging that the German commander used illegal ruses to lure Sydney into range, that a Japanese submarine was involved, and that the true events of the battle are concealed behind a wide-ranging cover-up. Construction and acquisition. The ship was laid down by Swan Hunter and Wigham Richardson at Wallsend-on-Tyne, England, on 8 July 1933 for the Royal Navy as HMS Phaeton, named after the Greek mythological figure. However, in 1934, the Australian government was seeking a replacement for the light cruiser HMAS Brisbane, and negotiated to purchase Phaeton while she was still under construction. The cruiser was renamed after the capital city of New South Wales, and was launched on the 22nd of September 1934 by the wife of Stanley Bruce, former Prime Minister of Australia and the serving Australian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Sydney was commissioned into the RAN on 24 September 1935, drawing her ship's company from Brisbane, which had been decommissioned earlier that day. Following the announcement that Australia was purchasing a British-built cruiser, there was criticism, primarily from the opposition of the day, stating that such a warship should be built using Australian resources and labour. Several reasons were given in reply for acquiring British-built cruisers instead of Australian-made. The ship was already close to completion. The pending threat of war meant that there was not enough time to train Australians in the necessary shipbuilding skills, and that of the 2 cruisers built in Australian shipyards, one had taken 7 years to complete. Design. Sydney was one of 3 modified Leander-class light cruisers acquired by the RAN during the late 1930s. Although the first ship of the class to join the RAN, Sydney was the 3rd ship in what was sometimes referred to as the Perth class. Perth and Hobart operated with the Royal Navy for a short period before they were purchased by Australia in 1938. Like most British cruisers, the Leanders were designed for long-range patrols, scouting, and trade protection duties. Sydney's displacement ranged between 6,701 tons and 8,940 tons, with a standard displacement of 7,198 tons. Improved fabrication and welding techniques made her 52 tons lighter than her sister ships. She had a length of 530 feet between perpendiculars and 562 feet 4 inches overall, a beam of 56 feet 8.5 inches, and a draft at standard displacement between 15 feet 3 inches forward and 17 feet 3 inches aft. The ship was propelled by 4 Admiralty 3-drum boilers, feeding Parsons geared turbines. which supplied 72,000 shaft horsepower to the 4 propeller shafts. Unlike the first 5 Leanders, which had a single machinery space, Sydney was designed with 2 redundant machine spaces, a design practice adopted from the United States Navy. The cruiser had 2 boilers and the turbines for the outer shafts forward, and 2 boilers and the turbines for the inner shafts aft, as steam from any boiler could be routed to any turbine. The ship could continue operating if one space was damaged. Each space had its own exhaust funnel, giving the modified ships a different profile to the single-funneled early Leanders, an arrangement which contributed to naval historian Henry Lenton's description of the modified Leanders as the most handsome cruisers ever built by the Royal Navy, with a symmetry that was as attractive as it was functional. Sydney and her sister ships were constructed from 1-inch hull plating, with a 3-inch armor belt over the machinery spaces to adequately cover both spaces negated the weight reduction from their reorganization, and 2-inch plates over the shell rooms and magazines. Sydney was the first Australian warship fitted with ASDIC, a Type 125 unit in a retractable pattern 3069 dome. The retractable sonar dome, located near the bow, was a weak point in the hull. One of the cruiser's early commanding officers, Royal Navy Captain J.W.A. Waller, believed that the ship's single director control tower was a weak point in the design. The director control tower was the highest compartment on the ship, from where personnel would determine the range and optimum firing angle for a gun salvo, then transmit this information to the gun turrets. The actual firing could be controlled from the tower or the turret. Waller believed that the centralized system could be destroyed with a single hit, or the wiring linking the compartment to the turrets could be severed, forcing the 4 turrets to rely on independent control. Although Waller suggested that a second tower be installed aft to provide redundancy, it was deferred indefinitely as subsequent commanding officers did not share his concerns, and combat experiences of other Leander-class cruisers showed that the system was more robust than expected. Armament Sydney's main armament consisted of 8 6-inch breech-loading Mk3 guns mounted in 4 Mk21 twin turrets, and B forward, X, and Y aft. All 8 guns could be fired in salvo, elevated to an angle of 60 degrees and depressed to -5 degrees, and fire 8 rounds a minute at targets up to 24,800 yards away. 4 4-inch quick-firing MKV guns, mounted on single, high-angle, MKIV mountings, were fitted to a platform around the aft funnel. These were primarily used to target aircraft at heights up to 28,750 feet, but could also be used against surface targets, with a maximum range of 16,300 yards. Their replacement with 8 Mk19 high-angle, low-angle guns in 4 twin mounts, which was to occur in the late 1930s, was prevented by the outbreak of World War II. The guns could have been swapped out during a maintenance docking, but the demand for cruisers and Sydney's fortune in never sustaining major damage meant that the additional time in dock could not be justified. For close-range anti-aircraft defense, the 4-inch guns were supplemented by 12 0.5-INCH Vickers Mk3 machine guns, which were arranged in 3 Mk2 quadruple mountings, one on each side of the forward superstructure, and the third on top of the aft superstructure. A mixture of 0.303-inch machine guns were used for close defense work, and could be fitted to pedestals at various points on the ship, primarily around the bridge and on the 3 searchlight platforms. At launch, Sydney carried 14 Louis machine guns and 2 Vickers machine guns, but by the start of World War II, the Lewis guns had been reduced to 9, and the Vickers guns removed completely. 8 21-inch torpedo tubes were fitted into QRMK7 quadruple mounts to the deck below the platform for the 4-inch guns. Only 8 marked Chapter 9 torpedoes were carried. Sydney was fitted with a single depth charge rail at the stern, which held 5 Mk7 depth charges. 4 3-pounder quick-firing Hotchkiss guns were carried as saluting guns. These were removed during the August 1940 refit. Sydney was fitted with a 53-foot, cordite-powered revolving catapult between the two funnels, which was used to launch a Supermarine Walrus amphibious aircraft. The Walrus was operated by Royal Australian Air Force personnel from No. 5 Squadron RAF. The 7-ton electric crane used to recover the aircraft also served to deploy most of the ship's boats.